Hello and welcome to Hopewell's Eating Disorder Awareness Week webinar, funded by Bell Let's Talk. Nurturing your child's relationship with food was co-facilitated by two registered dietitians, Kelly Spence and Dina. We hope you enjoy this fantastic resource.
There we go. All right, so today's workshop is on nurturing your child's relationship with food. And as we were just introduced, so I've worked at the Children's Hospital for about 12 years, but 8 years of those have been with the eating disorders program, specifically in day treatment program, as well as outpatients. But I've also worked on inpatients, and I worked for the Center for Healthy Active Living, which has the same philosophy as our program as well. So lots of different experiences, and some of those I will speak to a little bit throughout our presentation, but also in the question and answer period. Dina, did you want to say anything about, okay. I'm putting you on the spot. You're muted.
There, I'm sorry, you were just cutting out. I wasn't able to hear you. So I can hear you now.
Okay.
So yes, as Lindsay introduced, I'm Dina. I'm a registered dietitian and I work at Anchor Psychological Services. And prior to that, I did work in various different fields, but mainly working in eating disorders, including working at the Children's Hospital for a period in the eating disorders program as well. And so the majority of my work is in this field. And so I'll hand it over to Kelly, and I'll be speaking later on in the rest of the presentation.
All right, so we thought we'd start off our presentation with a little bit of a self-reflection, just something you know, sometimes teachers do in education. When I was in that field, it is something that we would do. So if you have paper and a pencil, that's great. If you don't, that's okay too. You can either just keep it in your head or you can type it out. So the first question is, what does normal eating mean to you? And there's no right or wrong answer. It's just like the first things that pop into your head. It could be just words, statements, anything really. The other one is, what is your relationship like with food? So again, it's about yourself, okay? And how do you foster a healthy relationship with food in your home? So just take a minute or two just to jot down some ideas. We will ask you the same questions at the end just to see if anything shifted. If nothing did, that's okay. But we will ask you the same questions, okay? Okay, so for the workshop objectives for today, we will review kind of our little, we have a little philosophy or like mandate about normalized eating that we use a lot in our practice. We will touch on diet culture and the influencers that impact eating and the relationship with food. We will talk about disordered eating as well as some aspects of eating disorders. As Lindsay indicated, we will talk a little bit about the impact that COVID has had on disordered eating and eating disorders and what we've been seeing. And I will speak specifically to what we're seeing at CHEO. And then Dina will get into the strategies for nurturing a healthy relationship with food. Okay. So what is normalized eating? This is a beautiful mantra that was written by a registered dietitian and social worker who has created this institute called the Ellen Satter Institute. And she's been a pretty cornerstone person in this area that we all rely on. So I use this with all my patients because they often come to me and say, Kelly, I don't know what normal eating is anymore. And this is an example of something that I think speaks to us as dietitians. So normalized eating is going to the table hungry and eating until you are satisfied, is being able to choose food you enjoy and eat it and truly get enough of it, not just stop eating because you think you should. Normal eating is being able to give some thought to your food selection so you get nutritious food, but not being so weary and restrictive that you miss out on enjoyable food. Normal eating is giving yourself permission to eat sometimes because you are happy, sad, or bored, or just because it feels good. Normal eating is mostly 3 meals a day, or 4 or 5, or it can occasionally be choosing to munch along the way. It is leaving some cookies on the plate because you know you can have some again tomorrow, or it is eating more now because they taste so wonderful. Normal eating is overeating at times, feeling stuffed and uncomfortable, and it can be undereating at times and wishing you had more. Normal eating is trusting your body to make up for the differences in eating, and normal eating takes up some of your time and attention, but keeps its place as only one important area of your life. In short, normal eating is flexible. It varies in response to your hunger, your schedule, your proximity to food, and your feelings. So I really like that. I like reading that to my patients. I run a nutrition group in the day treatment program, and this is something that we cover a lot of because, again, as I said, they forget how to eat normally for various reasons, and every eating disorder or disordered eating kind of presents differently. Dina, feel free to jump in anytime. Okay, okay. So essentially, there is no such thing as perfect nutrition or a perfect way of eating. And even though society and the media portrays it otherwise, when we think about what normalization is of eating and how to prevent disordered eating or eating disorders, really having this in the back of our heads is something that we really try to help our patients and clients with. So why is it so difficult to eat normally? As we know, we're bombarded with this stuff. It's everywhere. And the dieting industry is just rampant. So I'm just going to show all these slides. So as we can see, it's in every magazine. It's on every social media platform. It is everywhere. So again, I work specifically with kids. They are very much in tune with social media, and it's on TikTok. It's on every platform, which diet they should do, which foods they shouldn't eat, which foods they should eat, and so on and so forth, what their body should look like, what they shouldn't look like. And the pervasiveness of diet culture it's just so intertwined into, I guess, like the everyday messaging that it's hard to get away from. There's a dietitian by the name of Christy Harrison. She is similar to us. We're non-dieting dietitians, weight inclusive, health at every size. She has written a book called Anti-Diet, and some of the things that she has stated, so she'll say things like worship thinness and thinness and equates to health and its moral virtue, which means you can spend your whole life thinking you're irreparably broken just because you don't look like the impossible thin ideal. So we know that the diet industry demonizes certain ways of eating while elevating others, which means you're forced to think that what you're doing is either wrong or not right or not perfect. It makes people ashamed of their food choices and make them more hyper-vigilant about thinking about these things more than other aspects of their life. The diet industry also oppresses people who don't match up with its supposed picture of health, even though we know and all the research shows us that weight does not equate to health, which disproportionately harms women, trans folks, people in larger bodies, people of color, and people with disabilities, damaging both their mental and physical health. So there's a lot of research in the diet industry world, and there was one firm that found that there was about $72 billion on this industry, which was a record high in 2019. There was a worldwide market that there's $648 billion spent in healthy eating, nutrition, weight loss. And then on the flip side, we have seen large research studies that have shown that 95 to 98% of those who participate in dieting and dieting behaviors will regain the weight within a 2-year period. So what other product or strategy would we keep on using if we knew that it had a 95 to 98% failure rate? If you asked any physician this about a medication or like anything, it would most likely be taken off the shelf, right? There's something that the diet industry does, and again, this is what we do in day program. We go through all these marketing tools, and it'll have supplements on the magazines, and it'll show at the in the small print, it'll say this product has not been proven in an evidence-based research. This is just like anecdotal. So there's the whole industry is about making money. It's not about helping people be healthy and to understand how to have size acceptance and have a good relationship with food and their body. So I think
can
of
I
this.
just add one thing to that?
Yeah, go ahead.
The one thing to add is that it's I can't think of any other industry that would sell a product to a consumer, and then when the product doesn't work, really blames the consumer for that. And so the consumer feels that it's been their fault that they've gained back the weight and not the diet industry's fault. So just something to put in perspective, that, you know, that's really the only industry that we would see that happening. Sorry to interrupt there.
No, it's great. Jump in anytime. So we often hear this from patients and clients about it's like a boxing match that's going on in their head, like the different messages. So again, that unsure of how to eat normally, and so the eating disorder eating against the normalization. And unfortunately, because of the abundance of all these messages, like disordered eating has actually become the norm as opposed to the exception, and has created what I call food dysmorphia. It's not an actual term that's in there, but it's just something that over time that I've realized that when people struggle with either limiting portion sizes or different types of foods or different things like that, it's just the way that some of our patients view their bodies. It's the same as how they view their food, and it becomes dysmorphic, and they don't have a good sense of how to renormalize that. And that's part of why they're in treatment and how we help them relearn that through role modeling and practice and so on and so forth. But it really is like a boxing match in their brain, with a lot of rounds, a lot of up and downs, you know, different opponents at different times. And it's a really big struggle for them. So some of you may be aware of this already, but I will reiterate it for those of you who are not aware of how an eating disorder does develop, because there are certain things that are risk factors. And part of that is, I'm just gonna click it through all of it because the dieting industry is part of it. There could be some sort of stressor, so we can use COVID-19 as an example, and we will speak to it, but it can be any stressor in life that causes somebody to feel out of control, and that control could then be put onto food or exercise or both, or somehow their body. So leading to dieting practices, then feeling like they're achieving something and feeling successful in that then perpetuates the dieting, that then we see the snowballing of behaviors that kind of, they can get out of control. And a lot of patients have described, like, it sounded like I was just trying to get healthy in the beginning, and just one thing led to another, and I didn't realize it, and now I'm here. So, and ultimately, it's about 2% of people that do diet end up with an eating disorder. That's the most recent stat that I've seen. It could not be 100% exact, but it's close to that. So we know that there is a snowball effect that then leads to distress. And it's this distress that we have to help our patients and clients work through to get back to having a better relationship with food and body. So as we indicated with the Ellen Satter mantra, that normalization of eating means that, yes, you're thinking about food sometimes, you know, so you're thinking, okay, what am I going to make my family for supper? What am I going to pack for snacks? What am I going to make my daughter for school, or so on and so forth? But it doesn't take up every single minute of every single day. And I find with my patients, they know more about food, and may not be 100% accurate, but they think about food and they're researching more about food and nutrition, different things, more than I do. And I studied this for about 9 years. So there are things that I have, Dina and I were talking about this, how I have to look things up when they say it, and I'm like, their brain is so attuned to knowing that information and wanting to, sometimes it's a byproduct of the malnourishment, which causes them to be preoccupied because it's actually their brain's way of trying to get them to eat food. Which we know that having nutrition, physical activity, and unhealthy behaviors, so whether it's restriction, overexercise, binge, purge, vomiting, laxatives, or other drugs that are said to manipulate body weight, is not healthy practices. And so obviously we would want to try to work away from that. There's another dietitian that's been she's been very dominant in the eating disorders world, mostly in the States. Her name is Jessica Setnick, and she created this this diagram that I think is quite nice, because it talks about looking at nutrition either as positively or pathological, and how you can start to determine, if your child is struggling or starting to show signs, that the stuff under the pathological nutrition could be indicators that it could be leading to either disordered eating or therefore down the road an eating disorder. I won't go through it all, but we eat for different reasons throughout life, as the mantra also said, but it also missed out on, like, there's ethical, like, religious reasons, there's spiritual reasons, there's medical reasons, there's social reasons, and all these different areas in our life of why we eat. And a lot of the time with eating disorders, from my experience, it's that the only function of food serves to be either that it's physically thought of as being healthy or unhealthy. There isn't the notion of that the food has a role in the socialization, and it being good because you love the food, and that's that area. I don't know, Dina, if you want to add anything to that from your experience with clients.
I think that you described it really well, and really just looking at all the different pieces of nutrition, when we're looking at it in the positive nutrition light, the aspects of culture, socialization, enjoyment, and so forth are there. But with that pathological nutrition, it's really just the isolation and motivated by trying to manage as a coping mechanism. And so yeah, I think you touched on all those points.
This is so again, some of you may be familiar with eating disorders, some of you may not, and that is okay. This was created by a group of patients that I have worked with in the past, that they really wanted people to hear it in their own words of what they would want their loved ones or their people, their friends, their teachers, whoever in their life, some things about eating disorders. And then the handprint in the middle was to signify, we did a Wordle, if anybody's familiar with that, and everybody contributed the words anonymously. And the ones that came out the largest are the ones that have the most frequency. And so while we know that eating disorders tend to try to control the nutrition, the physical activity, and body shape, it ultimately comes down to how our patients and clients are feeling underneath. And all of my patients, I would say over time, have said some sort of permutation of these words, whether it's control, trapped, sad, stressed, they're feeling restricted in some ways. They sometimes want to disappear. So it's a lot about how they're feeling underneath, not necessarily really, it comes out on the food, and that's our job as dietitians to help them get back to a better place with their food, but ultimately it's their mental health that's driving the unhealthy behaviors. So lots of really great stuff here. So we will share this presentation as well, so if you want to reference this at any point in time, it's really great and powerful. So as we know, there are risk factors for eating disorders, and some, I'm not going to name them all, but just some of them are a family history of eating disorders. There is a genetic predisposition for certain from certain family members to their daughters or sons, there seems to be the strongest relationship from mothers to daughters for whatever reason. There's a lot of research to support that. Different personality traits. So we do see an increase in eating disorders with perfectionistic personality traits. Sometimes people have impulsivity and chaotic personality traits. Trauma, because of that, could be the stressor or the trigger. Diet culture, as we've talked about. Sports that emphasize body size, weight, or perfectionistic, achievements, whether it's, ballet with very specific, poses and things like that. There are an increased risk there. And there's lots of others, but we don't need to go into it because it's just a brief overview. So now we throw in the global pandemic. So we have seen, and there have been numerous interviews from different health professionals about the impacts of the pandemic on children and adolescents. So again, just anecdotally from the patients that I've been working with, they would say that, at CHEO, we've seen quite a large increase. We've had an increase of 50% of assessments and emergency assessments come in, but we've also had an increase overall of, I think it's about 63% that we've been treating. So we're what we call in surge, which means that our capacity is higher than what we have staff for, which is really, really tricky. And most of the patients would say that they had, there's a loss of control, which again, we talked about as being one of the triggers or how eating disorders develop. There's lots of uncertainty, like people are stressed, they have anxiety, they feel lonely and isolated, people are disconnected, they don't have their coping mechanisms. So we've seen a very large increase in athletes presenting with eating disorders. And the hypothesis is that when you take away somebody's identity or that could be coping as well, because some athletes use their sport as their coping, and that's removed from them, they no longer have that. And it was some of the athletes that we've worked with, they were trying to stay, I guess, with their fitness level, with their sport performance. And again, it just, it snowballed. They didn't have like their coaches or their trainers or the people that were kind of helping them, I guess, moderate it. And whether it just kind of got out of control is something that they would say. So we know that adolescents have less, they don't have as many tools for coping as adults do. And I don't know, Dina, I think that came from one of the psychologists that you worked with. I wasn't sure if there was anything in particular about that, but it's just they go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say, just to add to that, yes, they, less life experience than adults, and we as adults are, struggling with this pandemic as well. It is a really something that has been and continues to be a challenge for all of that. So for those who have less of those coping skills and tools, then it kind of does make sense that we may see something like this happening, where that shift would, and those elevated numbers that you're talking about in terms of what you're seeing at CHEO.
Yeah, definitely. And just, again, I kind of already spoke to this, but one thing that the initial research that's showing that about half of adolescents with eating disorders report a reactivation of symptoms of restricting and overexercising and fear of weight gain during the pandemic. The evolving literature also suggests that many adults with pre-existing eating disorders report a worsening in eating disorder symptoms during the pandemic as well. And so this is preliminary stuff that is coming out of a manuscript that's being published shortly. Don't need to go into all this. We have already talked about why we're seeing it. So when we think about how to help people through the pandemic and beyond, like we want to try to help our patients and clients have healthy coping mechanisms and not use maladaptive coping mechanisms such as restricting or binging or purging and different things like that. At CHEO, we try to help our patients create like a toolbox of coping strategies and tools, so that when they leave us and our program, that they have all these different things that they've tried, and different things work for different people. There's lots of patients that really like distraction or fidgets or mindfulness, breathing. You know, some people need to do like hold ice in their hands when they're distressed, or put ice on their face, go for a walk. Like there are so many that we try with our patients in order for them to figure out what works for them, because really we know that the eating disorder is maladaptive, so we want to try to have those really good, healthy, strong things that can help them through stressful times, because they will happen, and we don't want when they leave program, it may happen where they get reactivated with their eating disorder, but we would want them to try all these coping for when the stressors do arise.
And so with all that Kelly has discussed in terms of diet culture and disordered eating or eating disorders, and their prevalence and the development, how can we help prevent eating disorders or any disordered eating from occurring in our loved ones? And how do we move to helping to foster a healthy relationship with food? Because essentially developing that healthy relationship with food does lead to better outcomes, and helps with that prevention. Oh. So we just want to think about what the goals are when we're thinking about feeding children or feeding our youth. Goals are basically the physical health. So we want to make sure that they are growing well, they're developing, they're getting the nutrition that they need for health, for their immune system, they're developing strong bones. So that physical component is important. But we also want to look at the mental health as well, and ensure that that they do have good mental health with respect to eating, and that is part of not really a part of a lot of the messaging that you'll receive from outside sources in terms of feeding and in terms of nutrition. Most of the focus is on the physical health and trying to manipulate nutrition in order to support physical health. But we often see that when that's the sole focus, then mental health can be compromised. And so what we want as one of the goals is, you know, for children and youth to be able to enjoy eating, to eat in positive experiences, and really to develop those positive relationships with food and with their body. So that ultimate goal is called eating competence, and that was coined by Ellen Satter, who Kelly had mentioned earlier in the presentation, who had developed that what normal eating is. And so we'll talk a little bit more about what eating competence is. So competent eaters, they are relaxed around food. They like eating, they like being at the table. They're able to feed themselves based on how they're feeling and based on their preferences as well. And generally they follow their growth curves. So their growth and development is generally very normal. We don't see big spikes or blips in their curves. And research has shown that competent eaters do have lower risks of having challenges with food, of developing eating disorders, developing chronic diseases that may be impacted by food. And they have higher chances of developing positive relationships with food and positive body image. So we do see that competent eaters do have a better chance of meeting those goals of physical and mental health. And so I have many parents come into the office and ask about like how to do that. Like, how do we get a child to be relaxed around food and around eating, and to be able to develop that positive relationship with food. And so the first thing that I'll ask my parents that I speak with to do is really to let go of any of the external messages that they're getting. And that can be from media, that can be from family, friends. So that could be social media. That could even be things that, you know, you might be receiving some messaging from public health or medical offices. And while many of those messages may be very well intentioned, I'll talk about it a little bit later, how it can become a barrier to being able to eat in a way that is normalized, and being able to really listen to one's body and develop that positive relationship with food. And so in order to nurture your child's relationship with food, there are a few things that I'll go through, some strategies to use. And the first one we'll talk about is critical nutrition literacy. This is a term that Kelly has coined, and I'm stealing it, that I'll talk a little bit later about what that means, what that looks like. We'll move on to the division of responsibility, which some of you may have heard of. This is part of the framework that the Ellen Satter Institute uses for feeding and developing a positive relationship with food. And then we'll move into nutrition safety in the home and positive body talk, and then talk a little bit about some other positive practices. So starting with the critical nutrition literacy, what this really means is, you know, we are bombarded constantly by messages, external messages, like I mentioned before, and like Kelly's mentioned before. There are the diet culture messages that are surrounding us. There are messages that we're receiving from all over. You know, everyone is a nutrition expert, it seems. And so the first thing that, you know, we want our parents to think about, and also children to start to think about, especially as they're becoming more and more exposed to these messages, and as they become older and they can start to think critically about them, is really to ask the questions, think critically about this information that you're getting, the information that you're hearing, and really to be skeptical about it. If we think back to the numbers that Kelly talked about regarding the diet industry, if we're receiving all of these messages around the diet industry, all of those messages from the diet industry rather, we know it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. We know that their goal is to make money and is not for developing a positive relationship with food. Their goal is not for someone to have optimal health and considering physical and mental health. It really is a business. And so we really want to be skeptical about those messages that you're receiving. And I ask parents to really model this critical thinking for their children, especially if you start to hear some language or some talk at home, you know, about children kind of taking on some of these messaging or voicing some of the messaging, you know, even voicing it from, they may have heard things in their health class at school. That's something that we hear a lot of, as, you know, messages that were taken from a health class that maybe got distorted or maybe was someone's opinion. And they really take that to heart and can use it as rule, as something that has to be done. So I encourage you to have them kind of ask the questions as well, and really, you know, think about whether or not that information is true, is valid. I also encourage you to think about any biases that you may have around food, around nutrition and body. And if you do I mean, everybody does. It is surrounding us. So it's really, I mean, diet culture is everywhere. So it's really difficult to get away from and not have some biases. But really trying to be honest about it and recognize when you're noticing that it's there, because those messages can then be passed on to your children in different ways. And finally, to think of, or to remember that there is no perfect nutrition or no perfect way of eating, just like Kelly mentioned earlier on. With the division of responsibility, so this is a framework that, as I mentioned, the Ellen Satter Institute has developed, that really allows us to really understand the different roles that parents and children have in feeding. And so they each have their own roles to develop competent eaters. And I like to show this, and this is also something that's done at the Ellen Satter Institute, is kind of showing it as this road, this winding road that has 2 lanes, but it's got the solid line in between the 2 lanes so that no one is supposed to cross over into the other person's lane. And if we think about the division of responsibility that way, it helps us just to remind us that the parents' responsibilities are theirs, and the child should not be crossing over and taking on those responsibilities, just as the child's responsibilities are their own, and the parent should not be crossing over to their lane and taking on their responsibilities. So in the division of responsibilities, the parents decide what to eat at meals and at snacks. They decide when the meals and snacks will happen, and they decide where the eating will happen. The child's responsibility is to decide how much they will eat of whatever is available at each meal and snack, and really decide if they will eat. And the division of responsibility really is based on trust. So parents, it's encouraging parents not to pressure the child to eat any of the foods that are present. They simply offer the food, and they can help the child serve themselves if they're not old enough to. But it doesn't include pressure or even praise around eating certain types of food or choices in food. And the reason that it does that is because any of that kind of crossing over, it really has the child losing trust in themselves and their own innate abilities to feed themselves. Now, just a disclaimer, or not really disclaimer, but a point to note that if your child is struggling with an eating disorder, or you think your child may be struggling with an eating disorder, they cannot follow the division of responsibility while they're in the throes of an eating disorder. The eating disorder really just disrupts their ability to feed themselves appropriately. So it's really important to note that in these special cases, just like in another type of medical case, where a child may be ill and not able to feed themselves, but they do need nutrition, we would need to have that crossover in the lane. So that's just something to keep in mind. Your child, if your child has an eating disorder, they will require lots of support to eat before they can return to managing their own eating. And with treatment and support, many can return to normalized eating, but there will be that treatment period where they're going to require the support to do so. So now we'll talk a little bit about nutrition messages, and we've talked about them before earlier on in the presentation about how nutrition messages are all around us, the media, there's healthcare guidelines, there's nutrition messages coming from schools, from friends, from family, and so forth. And what's challenging with nutrition messages is that these can be viewed as rules, as black and white, or really as concrete ways of thinking. And, you know, especially with children who, you know, will take information and they really will see it as concrete ways of thinking. Any type of labeling or messaging can really shift what, you know, food actually means to them. And so things like labeling food as good food or bad food or healthy food or unhealthy food, junk food, those types of labels really can add this level of morality to food. And to a child, that means eating a good food means I'm good. Eating a bad food means I am bad. It's very black and white. And so having these types of messages really can lead to challenging relationships with food. And we know that if we provide neutral messages around food, it actually decreases guilt or shame around eating different foods. And let's remember, you know, there is no morality to food. Food is food. So if they are experiencing some sort of guilt or shame around it, then we know that that is really challenging their relationship with it. So I'll talk a lot with the parents that I meet with about nutrition safety in the home. And what I mean by that is avoiding labeling food as good or bad, as healthy or unhealthy, or as junk food, and really try to shift that. I ask that family bring it into the household and really challenge the beliefs around food, around nutrition and body image, and start to bring in more of the neutral messaging to help build that positive relationship with food. So terms like all foods can fit, there are no good or bad foods, variety and balance, those we try to bring those types of messages into the vocabulary in the home. Another piece is to avoid talking about things like calories or about body weight or body shapes or exercise, especially in the context of, you know, eating a meal or eating certain foods, or comparisons with other people, other bodies. Another piece of nutrition safety in the home is also removing diet foods from the home, because having any type of low fat or diet foods really just perpetuates that diet culture message in the home. And so we want to avoid having that message around, because even those slight messages can have a big impact on that black and white thinking that can happen. So we'll often get questions about, you know, treats and desserts and fun foods, and really, you know, how can all foods be at the same level? How can all foods fit? How can we include these foods? And we ask you to think about restraint theory and what restraint theory says. So, you know, what happens if we have, say, a toddler in a room full of toys, and we tell the toddler, you can play with every single toy in this room except for this one toy. This one toy, you can't play with it, and we put it off to the side. We know that, you know, the toddler is going to want to play with that toy because it has been deemed to be more special. Same type of ideas if you were trying to stay away from certain types of food. If you're restricting certain foods, actually just makes them more appealing. And so what can happen is restricting things like desserts, treats, and fun foods, it actually puts them on this higher level of just this higher level, this hierarchy, and they can seem way more appealing if they are restricted. So this can result in a sense of loss of control when children are around these foods. You may notice that, the children that are restricted from having these foods are overeating them when they are available. So if they're going to a friend's house, or if they're at a birthday party, they may want to be eating those foods a lot more. And then it can even lead into these behaviors of binge eating, of food hiding, and lead to guilt and to shame. So we really want to avoid that from happening, and ways to do that is really to include these foods on a regular basis. So include desserts regularly at meal times. Include some as snacks, like have cookies and milk for snack. Have a dessert at your dinner table. Treat them really as neutral foods. There should not be any type of commenting on or commenting on which foods are chosen, whether certain foods should be eaten first before being able to have, treats and so forth. And they really shouldn't be used as rewards or for punishment, because again, that's really compromising the child's ability to regulate themselves naturally around these foods. It really puts those foods at a higher level again. So this can seem, for some who tend to not offer treats or desserts or fun foods on a regular basis, it can be a bit shocking, or it can be difficult, and they worry that, the children are only going to eat these foods, that they may become out of control. However, what we do see is that with regularly being exposed to these foods, with that habituation, the novelty of them wears off. It can take time for them to become neutral if they haven't been available at the home before. But with that, continued exposure, it does decrease the kind of appeal to those foods. So other practices that can be helpful for really developing a positive relationship with food include things like having family meals. When I say family meals, a lot of times it'll be thoughts of, having to have a big home cooked meal, having to pull out new recipes and so forth. And that's not what we mean by family meals. Really, family meals can be anything that you put together. It can be takeout. It can be anything at all, but having the whole family, or as many people in the family as possible, eating together. It really helps to normalize eating meals. It provides a sense of connection, and really children actually do better when they are exposed to family meals on a regular basis. Establishing a meal, snack, and schedule can be very helpful in establishing that trust that we talked about between parents and child. The child can trust if there is some sort of regular schedule for meals and snacks. They can trust that there will be food at the next meal or snack. So if they are not hungry at the current meal or snack, they don't have to force themselves to eat. They can trust what their body cues are telling them, and they know that the food will be available at another time. And then finally, trusting your child and allowing your child to choose the foods that they like, which foods they enjoy, how much they're going to eat. Allowing them to do that really allows them to tap into what their body's needs are. And really, studies have shown that if we allow our children to eat in a way that they're making the choices with what's available to them, overall, they do gravitate towards foods that have the nutrients in them that their bodies actually need. So overall, they can nourish themselves really well. There are special conditions where, there may need to be interventions for different medical conditions, but if there are no standing medical conditions or mental health conditions that could impact that, then really allowing your child to make these choices will help them to become better attuned with their body's needs, and be able to really have a positive relationship with food. And part of that trust is to avoid any pressure or praise around eating. Again, the pressure to eat certain foods or praise around choosing particular foods really is an external message around food, and we want to try and avoid that as much as possible, because again, that's a message that could interfere with the child trusting their own body's signals. We'll talk a little bit about weight concerns. That's something that comes up a lot in my office. I'm sure, Kelly, that it comes up in your office as well. I have, parents that, especially with a lot of the messaging that does come from, from public health messages, from doctors' offices, and so forth. There is this kind of this concern that we need to be watching children's weight. We need to be managing children's weight. And so I really want to highlight that, bodies come in all shapes and sizes. Bodies, shapes, and sizes, and the weights that our children and our bodies will have is really predetermined by our genetics. Our genetics will determine what weight the body is happiest at and functions best at, just like our genetics determines what our eye color is, and our skin color, and our shoe size. I think it's really important to note that weight gain is a normal part of growth. And there are fluctuations in weight, especially, as children grow, their bodies are going to be changing, and some at really rapid rates.
Dina, can I just speak to that a little bit? Is that okay?
Yes, absolutely.
Just from the adolescent perspective, there's this perception I find with some patients is that when they're done growing in height, they should no longer be growing in weight, which is not true. The adolescents are still expected to be gaining over time, and while it's not at the same rate, it doesn't just stall out, because their organs and like everything in their body is still developing up into their 20s. And we just I like to normalize that with the patients as well. Like it's not meant to be static, and we still will see this like gradual increase over time.
Yes, thank you. That's super, super important. And really, like, our bodies do change throughout our lives. So even into adulthood, we experience changes in our body weight, shape, size, and those are normal parts of, the life cycle. So thank you for highlighting that, Kelly. Excuse me. Another important point is that health is, our body weight or size is not an indicator of health. Our health is not determined by what our weight is or what our size is. And nutrition is not the sole influencer of health. Diet culture can really make it seem like it is, or like it has a lot more of an influence on health. But it really is a very small piece of what physical health at least is, and as well as a large piece with mental health. We really want all of our children to have good health and well-being, regardless of what their weight is. And so the problem with focusing on weight is that it does create this weight bias. And in particular with children, with adolescents, this weight bias happens at a time when the child's body is going through a lot of changes. And what can happen is this may teach children to fear normal changes in their body with growth and development. And in those cases that may put a focus on dieting behaviors, on unhealthy weight control behaviors, which can then, as Kelly talked about, can really snowball. So if we are focusing on weight, then all of this is kind of putting all of these risks in place for that snowball effect to happen. So instead of focusing on weight, I think about focusing on good health, both mental and physical health. Encourage things like size acceptance, which is more inclusion. And then what parents will often ask, when should we be concerned about weight? The concern is when there is disturbance in their growth, or if there's disturbances in development. That's when we need to look at if what's going on, what can be impacting their weight and their proper growth and development. So what we encourage is really to allow nature to take its course, allow the child to be able to regulate their intake if they are able to. Again, with an eating disorder, they wouldn't be able to, and parents and a treatment team would need to step in to help with that. But otherwise, it's really, letting nature take its course. Kelly, did you have comments on that as well?
I was just going to speak about when I worked at the Center for Healthy Active Living. It's the program at CHIO that works with kids who have severe complex obesity. And even for those kids, when their BMIs are the 99th percentile for age, the goal is not weight loss. The goal is to work on health behaviors and to reduce the comorbidities that could be associated with their weight being at a higher place. So if they had obstructive sleep apnea, then it would be to help correct that. If they had fatty liver disease, if they had hyperlipidemia, it would be about trying to manage those things and to do that through
Kelly,
modifying health behaviors. So the goal,
okay.
Did I cut out?
You cut out on my end for a bit, so I'm not sure if everybody else. But
what was the last word you heard?
I heard cut out and modify the healthy behavior, modify for healthy behaviors. Yes.
Did you hear like obstructive sleep apnea?
Yes.
And okay.
Yes.
So sorry.
That's okay.
So weight loss is not the goal. The goal is to help them be healthy. And if weight loss happens as a result of helping them have healthier behaviors, if there were modifiable health behaviors, then so be it. But it was never the goal. The goal is to just help them be healthier from a mental health perspective, a physical health perspective, and overall. So just to speak to the fact that happens in the obesity world and it as well.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay. We just put in a couple of slides about body image because it's something that does come up a lot. And so, parents often will ask about, how do we talk about body image? How do we help our children to have or to improve their body image? And we go back to, the facts that all bodies are individual and really determined by our genetics. So, just like our eye color and hair color, our natural weight where our body wants to land, or our natural shape, that's determined by genetics as well. And it's important to remember that bodies change throughout our lives, and that our bodies do not define our value and our worth. That is something that diet culture really perpetuates, is that your worth is defined by your body. So it's really important to pass along the message that this is not true. So I often will talk to parents about, what their relationship is, like what they're talking about with regards to their body or how they treat themselves, and can they think about themselves, or can they treat themselves in a kinder way regarding their bodies if there are pieces where they are not able to. Can they model that behavior for their children? So that's kind of the first thing, is just, if you're at home with your children, if there are struggles that you have with your own body, You know, just really being aware of that. And if that is present, it makes lots of sense that, you know, because we are inundated by diet culture, but really just being aware of it to begin with. And then avoiding commenting on your child's body. This is really important thing. Even if it feels like it's a helpful comment, any comments on your child's body really is highlighting that body size or body shape is important in some way. And we want them to know that what's important is themselves, but not what their body looks like. Also avoiding to comment on other people's bodies. So again, commenting on other people's bodies really sends that message that bodies are important and bodies add value to a person. Excuse me. So rather than focusing on what a body looks like, we try to focus on what bodies can do and how they feel. So function versus appearance. So how their body feels, how movement feels, and what kind of activities feel good for their body. Those are the things to kind of focus on more so. Again, consider how you talk about your own body, and is that something that, you know, children may be picking up on? Can you talk kindly about your own body? And can you talk about how, you know, the wonderful functions that it may have? Just a little note about scale safety. So this is something that we talk about in particular with parents who have children with eating disorders, but really can be helpful for any parents. You know, if the scale is not medically necessary in your home for some reason, we recommend removing scales from the home. Weighing can be an obsessive behavior that comes about and can continue with an eating disorder. So we do want to try and keep our children safe from developing those behaviors. So we do recommend removing scale from home. Being mindful of when your loved one may have access to a scale. So are there public places that they may be going to that they can weigh themselves, or friends' homes? Do they get weighed at the doctor's office? And if seeing their weight is a trigger, especially if it's a child who has an eating disorder or is obsessively weighing themselves, then can you protect them from that? Can you ask that they do not relay what the weight is to the child? Also protect your loved one from other people's comments about their bodies, their weight, their shape, and their size. This is regardless of if they have an eating disorder or not. Bodies are changing, especially throughout, you know, childhood, adolescence, and comments can really stick and become those black and white thoughts. So we really want to ensure that you are protecting your loved ones about those comments. So whether it's, you know, talking to friends or family about, you know, not making comments, or other measures that you might take, we do recommend, you know, having those conversations to keep your children safe. So we've now come to the end of the presentation portion, and we'll go through those 3 questions that we went through at the beginning that Kelly read to you at the beginning of our workshop. And I'll read them out to you, and we just wanted to ask them again in case there were other things that maybe shifted or came about for you after hearing the presentation. And so, what does normal eating mean to you? What is your relationship like with food? And how do you foster a healthy relationship with food in your home? So we'll just give you a few moments to think about those. And not that, you know, it doesn't mean that anything had to shift or change. but sometimes, you know, thinking about different topics may bring up other thoughts. And so we wanted to give you a chance to reflect again.